It is wonderful to be back. I returned from Israel at 3 a.m. on Friday morning. Not the scheduled arrival time, but I got here nonetheless. During my time in Israel at the Hartman Institute, we studied, as I mentioned before, Judaism and time. And of course, one of our focuses, in addition to the holidays, but really we began with the holiday of all holidays in the Jewish tradition, with Shabbat. Shabbat makes an appearance in this week's Torah portion. Moshe and Aharon go to Pharaoh and tell him famously, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh refuses. We read in chapter 5, verse 4, "The king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their task? Get to your labors." And Pharaoh continued, "The people of the land are already so numerous. V'hishpatem otam misivlotam." And you would, it's translated here, have them cease from their labors. But what it says is you would have them Shabbat from their labors. You would have them take a rest. Pharaoh is the enemy of Shabbat. Pharaoh doesn't want the people to pick up their heads from their labors, from their slavery. Pharaoh doesn't want the Jewish people, the Israelites, to look up and to know that something else is possible. Shabbat is, the rabbis tell us in other places, it is a taste of the world to come. It's a taste of what is possible, and we experience it once a week to remind ourselves of what it is that we should be working for in the world. A day when no one is oppressed by another human being, when all are free. The rabbis say in another place, in Masechet Beitza, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon, said Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Shimon, Amar Lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, the Holy One, blessed be He, said to the Jewish people, Banai levu alai, my children, borrow on my account, v'kadshu kedushat hayom, and sanctify the sanctity of the day, v'ha'aminu bi v'ani porea, and trust in me, I will repay the debt. Once a week, don't worry about whether or not you're going to be able to pay for food. Don't worry about what's going to happen with your employer. Once a week, I am giving you rest. And God assures us, borrow on my account, I will pay the debt, you get a Sabbath. In a different place, on thinking about the idea of a vow, what is it then when we say a vow? A vow is when we say, in this moment of clarity that I have in the present, I'm going to secure my future. I, in a future, may feel weak about whether or not I'm going to eat those chocolate chip cookies. I'm saying a vow here in this moment of clarity that I have a future that's waiting for me and I can secure it. I was reminded while I was in Israel, Barbara Walters passed away. And somebody noted that Barbara Walters was the same age as Martin Luther King. That Anne Frank was the same age as Martin Luther King. That they were born the same year. And that reminds us that Martin Luther King was taken from us far too soon. The Reverend Martin Luther King was someone who told our society, pick up your heads from your labors and see that something different is possible. He used his life to secure for us a different, still incomplete, but better future than the one which we had. He said to us, borrow on my account and God will pay the debt. And this weekend, we remember. And it is an honor to have with us the Mayor Pro Tem of Durham, the Pastor Mark Anthony Middleton. He was sworn as the Mayor Pro Tem on December 4th, 2021. He is the founder and senior pastor of Abundant Hope Christian Church in Durham, North Carolina, the founder and chief executive of Abundant Hope Incorporated, and the host of the On the Table talk show on the Choice FM radio station. He's a native of Brooklyn, New York, and now has resided in Durham for over 20 years. He is a nationally recognized leader for his work in Durham CAN congregations, associations, and neighborhoods on issues such as affordable housing, living wages, equal protection, and racial profiling. He organized and led CAN's participation in a multi-organization coalition that worked for and attained historic policy changes by the Durham Police Department. And he was recently part of an official Durham City delegation that traveled to Boston on a fact-finding mission, and also served on the assessment team for candidates seeking the position of Durham Police Chief. And not in this bio, but he also recently returned from a visit to the state of Israel. And after Kiddush today at approximately 1 o'clock, he and I will share a conversation and reflections about each of our recent visits to the state of Israel. But this morning, he is here to help us celebrate and remember and rededicate ourselves to the vision of the late Reverend Martin Luther King. Mayor Pro Tem Middleton. You can take off your mask up here. Thank you for coming.
Shabbat Shalom. I am beyond honored to be able to stand in this sacred space on this sacred day. How fitting it is that we would be in this place on this day to honor the legacy of Dr. King, and I'll say more about that in a moment. Firstly, I want to thank my friend and my brother, Rabbi Greyber, for such a gracious invitation and introduction. I told, we were talking a little bit about my trip to Israel. I told him, I don't even like bread anymore unless it's thrown at me. When I was a kid, I used to get in trouble for stuff like that. And who'd have thunk? We are at a crossroads in our country and in our city. And before I get into that, as I stand in this place, I'm reminded to honor the legacy and life of the late, great Rabboni, Rabbi Sager, who taught me Midrash while at Duke, who would not be pleased with the state of my Hebrew today. But I remember something that stuck with me that Rabbi Stephen Sager taught us. When you read the sacred text, every word means something. Nothing is accidental. Every jot, every tittle. And I've always thought that, that's a great application for sacred text, but we have some secular sacred text in our nation as well. Our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution. And the prophet we honor this weekend, Dr. King, was a master at exegeting those sacred texts and making us mindful that every jot, every tittle meant something. There was no haphazard placement. It was formulaic, and it was intentional. And every once in a while, particularly here in Durham, we need to revisit what those jots and tittles meant. It's fitting that we're here to celebrate Dr. King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who quoted and loved the Hebrew prophets. So much of his worldview and cosmology was informed by the words of the Hebrew prophets, by the Exodus story, and almost this visceral, spiritual connection that African Americans and black people around the world share when we read the story of Moses bringing the children of Israel out of Egypt. How fitting, almost Shakespearean, the connection we see. He loved Isaiah. He loved Amos. He loved the writings of the great Jewish thinker Martin Buber, who taught us to not thingify people, that it's important that we have an I-thou relationship as opposed to an I-it relationship. It's important that we honor Dr. King in the fullness of his resume, the fullness of his experiences, because when we don't do that with people, and as we've seen this in Durham, and I'll talk about this for just a moment, when we distill folk down to a few statements or a few casual experiences, we miss some things. It does violence to the ability for us to, as the prophet taught us, to come, let us reason together. Because our sins are great and as scarlet. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, and even as the words Shabbat Shalom resonate in this place, peaceful rest. Dr. King taught us, and Durham hear this well, that there is a difference between peace and silence. Sometimes we confuse peace with the absence of protest, the absence of noise. But Dr. King taught us that sometimes there's silence because voices have been silenced, because there is oppression. I spoke of the jot and tittles of our sacred documents. Have you ever read the words carefully of the preamble of our Constitution? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, which translates to peace. But read it again. That was not a haphazard array. It was formulaic. Establish justice, and then comes your domestic tranquility. Some of us just want to get straight to the domestic tranquility without the establishment of justice. So in a strange way, friends, it was actually former slave owners that actually came up with the saying, no justice, no peace. Even slave owners understood that. That when you deny people justice, domestic tranquility is a facade. You could attain domestic tranquility through oppression, through silencing people. But it is justice that truly ensures it. We hold these truths, Dr. King would often intone, to be self-evident. He called it our national creed, that all men are created equal, all people are created equal. Interestingly enough, we're the only nation in history to ever write that down. Did you know that? The French hinted at it with Égalité, Liberté, Fraternité, but we're the only nation that actually wrote that down as part of our national creed. And it caused a problem for us because we dared to placard it before the world, that declaration, and then we had to go out and prove it. So what are we saying here in Durham when we look at our national texts, these sacred texts, and look at how Dr. King exegeted them for us and challenged us? Durham has a reputation for being this great progressive city, and it is. It's a wonderful place. Our restaurants, our cultural center, DPAC, the best, this is my commercial for Durham. Best theater between Atlanta and DC, one of the highest per capita PhD rates in the country. Great weather. North Carolina Central University, Duke University, great educational institutions. I call it the pamphlet Durham, the one that we portray to the world, the outward-facing one. But we know there have been some scars, some hurts, some stumbles, some disappointments for African Americans, for LGBTQ, IA plus folk in our community, for our Latino brothers and sisters, for the Jewish community in Durham as well. Dr. King would remind us that in order to have peace, we must reason one with another, and there must be justice. Dr. King's legacy for us in Durham is we got to talk to each other more. And we can't assume that silence means that there's true peace. We can't assume that things are well in our neighborhood, so it must be well in the city. Dr. King should make us uncomfortable. It's easy to celebrate him and distill him down to I have a dream and I've been to the mountaintop and clap from a distance. But when you really unpack Dr. King's legacy, Durham, it's discomforting because it challenges us to look beyond our own tribal markings and our own neighbors. You know, as I conclude, America's a pretty weird place. You think about what the American proposition before the world is. We have proposed that we are able, this crazy, diverse hodgepodge of people, we have proposed before the world that not based upon dynastic bloodline, not based upon one religion, not based upon a crown to hold us together culturally, but on an idea, we have proposed that we are able to carve out shared space and not kill each other in the process. Not based upon land grabs, at least not anymore, but upon the idea that we can look at each other and decide we are going to create a sacred shared space in which we can all thrive and live and find joy and find meaning for our lives. And that work, Bethel, is ongoing. Dr. King, as he liked to say, was merely a drum major, was merely a voice crying out in the wilderness. It belongs to us now to continue the work of looking at each other and bringing our whole selves, not just Dr. King, Reverend Dr. King, not just you, but your family and how you love and where you live and all of your feelings and all of your hopes and dreams and aspirations, our full selves to the desk. And to reason with one another if Durham is to truly remain ascendant. On behalf of our mayor, the entire government of the city of Durham, and the almost 300,000 souls that call this place home, thank you. Thank you for being a house not only of prayer, but of let us reason together. For over the years, not just in this Watts-Hillendale neighborhood, but throughout the entire city, being a beacon of what Durham is truly about, of being a light of hope. I mean that. These type of conversations you might think go on often, but they don't go on that often. Durham has a reputation, and we've gotten a lot of accolades, but on a little bit of work. And there's more work to be done. And I want to thank you for leaning in to that work. You want to honor Dr. King? Become uncomfortable. Do not shirk from the hard conversations. Do not continue to participate in the renewal of the American proposition that we can carve out shared space. We'll start right here in Durham, across racial, religious, economic lines, to continue to make this the beacon of the South. I'm honored to be here today. And I've had a lot of invitations to kick off this MLK holiday. This is my first official MLK celebration event, and I could not think of a better way to kick it off. In this sacred place, with the words of the prophet still echoing in my ears, with the image of the great Exodus that's so dear to so many of us in this city and across this nation. And a reminder that you shouldn't just rest in quiet. You should rest in peace. And peace is not the absence of noise. Peace is the presence of justice. We've got a hard road ahead of us. We all know that the incidents of racial animus and violence, particularly against our Jewish brothers and sisters, is on the rise in an alarming rate. I get the reports, I get the briefings all the time. That's not just your problem. It can't be. You can't honor Dr. King and say that it's just your problem. The blood of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman will not permit it to be just your problem. It's our problem. But because we weekly, many of us weekly, pause and take rest and reflect on the promises that God has given us, I'm very optimistic about our future in Durham. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Let us continue to work together to create that new morning and usher in new sunrises for our city that we all love so much. God bless you. Thank you for having me, and have a wonderful King holiday. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. I want to, before you go away, we're going to finish up the service, and then first of all, we promise to throw some challah at you.
Yes.
Okay? We look forward to it. And I want you to know, I know you already know this, but in our community, we have a racial justice task force, which is doing that work of looking within. And on behalf of our community, we extend our hand. We are grateful for your leadership, for you stepping forward and not saying, you may have said, why me? But in the end, you got drafted into it. And we are committed to building a Durham of justice, and that can be a Durham truly of peace for our community. So thank you.
God bless you, brother.